the Jesus People movement, really an open arm to people who were on the margins that had been ostracized by traditional churches. People come to Christ, because Pastor Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee and all the others that were part of that movement said, we're not going to require that you cut your hair or look a certain way to be able to worship God. And, that's had a huge impact in Costa Mesa, but also was a movement that went around the world. And that's shaped my faith to understanding this interdependence, that it isn't an individualistic faith. It isn't, the individualism is an idol of our country.
Wow.
And not something that comes out of walking with Christ. Someone said to me recently when I was preparing for Easter, they said, please don't say that all the disciples abandoned Christ, because the women disciples were at the cross. They were there, and there were women disciples, and the women funded Jesus's ministry.
Oof.
And so to say that, women can only go so far, or that they haven't been a part of it from the very beginning, I think that's blasphemous.
Amigos, welcome to Christian Podcast. It's been a journey. It's been a wild ride to do these episodes. I'm not going to go into details because I would take like 10 minutes out of your precious time. But I'll tell you this. Today we have a special guest, Christine Nolf. She's a woman pastor in the city of Costa Mesa. And what I want to try to do is do more English episodes that can be, what I want to do is have my wife, but today our little kid was sick, so he stayed home. But that's what we want to do. We want to bring people from the community more often and do these episodes, hopefully, to inspire an entire planet. The entire 8 billion people in the world. That's what we want to do. And I think that's a little bit related to what I want to talk about today with you, Christine. But before we do, I want to say, how are you feeling today? Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's so great to be here.
Awesome.
I feel like so comfortable in my little spot with my Christian Podcast mug.
Nice. All right. I love it. Okay. So we're going to kick it off with an emoji reaction. Okay. So,
let's hear it.
The Beliefometer. And this is based on basically I asked you before, how do you feel, right?
Yes, previous conversation.
Yeah, so I call this the Beliefometer. So we go to the Beliefometer. And the emoji up today is the skeptical emoji. Christine, why do you feel skeptical these days?
Okay, well, just to be clear, I said in between skeptical and inspired. I know.
True that.
I know you don't have like a half
in betweener
emoji.
Hey, that would be kind of cool.
But I will
Good
say,
idea.
I think I said that today because I really do feel like I live a lot of my life in between inspired, I would say, like by the Holy Spirit, and skeptical about like, is this all worth it? Like, does this even matter? Like trying to live my life following Christ. Like, I think it's easy to look around the world and say, what's the point? And yet I can't deny the work of the Spirit in my own life, in our community, in the world around me. And so I do find myself between these two often.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense. And, something I wanted to talk about in this episode specifically is, the fact that you're a woman pastor. And I think, as far as I know, in my city, in our city, Costa Mesa, you're now the only lead pastor that's a woman in the entire city. I don't know. Maybe you know a few more. I know before we had Sarah, right? Sarah Heath or Reed?
Halverson, or Sarah Heath, yeah.
Sarah
and
Heath,
Sarah
right?
Halverson, both at different times. Yeah.
Okay, so there were a few. But, it's just interesting because I know there's this concept when it comes to, I don't know if it's theological concept or just like a church concept, or it's maybe a in general concept, but it's egalitarianism and complementarianism. Is that a thing for you? Do you resonate with those words even, or does that matter to you?
Yeah, I think those play out more theologically when you look at marriage in particular, but I think there is they definitely play into people's understanding of leadership and who can lead. And I just want to be clear, I am not our lead pastor. I co-lead with I have a co-pastor, Jeff Tanner, and we lead together and we have different roles.
Okay.
Which has also been just a really cool adventure and thing to figure out.
So just going back to this question, in your church, would you be able to be the lead pastor, or is that a position you've never aspired to?
No, we just did away with that structure completely. But yes, theologically, I would be able to be the lead pastor. Okay.
That's very interesting, because is that I mean, like the other day we talked to a pastor from Tennessee, and she's a woman, but she's like it's very typical that in a Latino community, the wife of the pastor, well, she's the pastor, right? The woman pastor. La pastora. Exactly.
I know. Somebody recently met my husband and he lo saludó como, hola, pastor. Como yo soy la pastora, pensaban que él fue el pastor. Pero él no es pastor.
Right. So, I mean, that speaks a lot, like volumes of, like, Latino culture is almost like, we got to do this together, right? And I think the assumption is the pastor is the guy and the wife is it's a pastor, but she's more like a supportive role. So anyways, that's kind of strange. But do you think, or how do you see that? I mean, how do you see that tension of co-leading or being co-pastors as husband, wife?
Well, we're not husband and wife. My co-pastor and I, we're not married to each other. We're both married, but we're married to other people. But I think in terms of how I've seen it even play out in Latin America, I have known where the woman was the pastor and the husband was not the pastor. So I think it does come back to where like the denomination is theologically. I was just in Belize last week and drove by a church, and it has the name of the pastor painted on the side of the church, and it was like La Pastora Ruth. Oh, wow. And so I find myself praying for Pastor Ruth, even though I just drove by. I don't know her or anything. So I think it does depend on the congregation, on the denomination, and truly like the leadership of the person. I mean, I don't think that, I think there's certain skills and calling required to be a pastor, and I think that's available to men and women. And I think the work of the elders is to discern who has, that gifting in leadership and who does God have for that congregation at this season.
Yeah, I love that. So I guess I only have like two more questions around this idea. What would be, I mean, one is it's kind of like centered around the idea that is the hope that in the near future, if there's denominations that, I don't know, I'm just going to use these words, right? Just to make it simple, that block women from becoming pastors. Do you think there's a more hopeful future where that's not even a question, like, oh, because you're a woman, you can't even be a leader? And I mean, maybe the assumption is some of these denominations die or they have to change their views on this. But would that be something hopeful for you to talk about, or did you not care that much about that, or how do you hope in that future specifically?
Yeah, I would say I'm very hopeful for that, and I think even when you mentioned churches in our particular city, there are quite a few women in associate roles, executive pastor roles that carry a lot of leadership in their church and are amazing leaders. And so I would say like capable of lead pastor roles if that was something that they wanted to do. And I think I'm hopeful just because women have carry so much in the church in general. I mean, when you think about like what, kind of the force of how churches run, who's serving in the church, how people are cared for in the community. Women are such a huge part of that. And so I think if we don't have, if like how you say, if we block women from leading in greater roles, we're just missing out as the body. I think like any person who has like unique giftings and skills, bringing their leadership to the table like in a full, complete way is going to benefit the body. And anytime that people are blocked from that, I think the body misses out. I think we devalue individuals and women in particular, and then that does lead to skepticism and just a sadness of a frustration in our own calling. And so I think women have gotten creative about how to lead in the church where they're not able to. And I think the churches where women have led have reaped the benefits of that.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And I love that because I didn't even know these terms like egalitarian and complementarian as it pertains to, women in leadership and all of that until I was here in the US. Like, it never even crossed my mind like, they cannot. And I guess my only last question in this topic would be, this is just fun, right? It's just a fun question. To me, it doesn't really matter. That's why I have the blasphemous emoji for things like people disagree with me or whatever. But it would be around the idea, is there a limit from your perspective, is there a limit to what a woman can do in leadership? Like your own theology, just for yourself, personal. Like, do you think there's like a woman that does that's a little stretch for you to perceive, or you think it's limitless?
In my own theology, I don't have that. And I mean, that's based on scripture. I mean, I think particularly, someone said to me recently when I was preparing for Easter, they said, please don't say that all the disciples abandoned Christ, because the women disciples were at the cross. They were there, and there were women disciples, and the women funded Jesus's ministry. Oof. And so to say that, women can only go so far, or that they haven't been a part of it from the very beginning, I think that's blasphemous. There's Lydia had hosted, many people believe she pastored the house in her home. Paul often writes to the men and the women who are hosting in their home, which is, at that point, was the leader of the church. Mm-hmm. So I think, it's not just kind of my opinion, but I think there are scriptural basis for that kind of theology.
Love it. Okay, so that's that for the women in leadership. I love that. I love that approach, and I'm hopeful, like you are, for more women in these roles. And I just think as a society, right, like we need to be more open to that. But anyways, let's move on. The next thing I want to talk about is what's really burning in your heart these days. Like if there's one thing you are like, this is what I'm aiming for, and even maybe related to your skepticism, right? That at the beginning, what's your biggest passion these days? Like, what are your heart burning for? What is your heart burning for?
I love that question. I used to love this question a lot more when I was younger. I think I had a quicker answer. There was always something that I was that I was burning for. And I don't think that is any less. I think I've grown in wisdom in the sense that what I've been thinking about a lot lately is the benefit of faithfulness, and how instead of like, what's the next big thing, or what's my next big like passion or thing that I'm going to be all about, is I've really been just contemplating a lot the strength that comes in just walking it out day by day by day. When you don't see huge changes, and I think like loving your neighbor over time, it takes a whole set of years to become close to a person, to like know them well, to care for someone. So, I'm raised in the evangelical church. We like do these big events to like show our neighbors that we love them. But I generally don't get to know people at those events. And I've just, I think, been moved by the power of visiting someone, over and over, caring for someone. And so like, it doesn't feel, it's not huge. It's not like a big story. It's not a big thing to tell. But when I look around at our city and I see people who have been faithful for years, in their walk with Christ, in their care for their neighborhood, and their care for our community, I mean, that is really moving to me right now. Just on Saturday, I was here on this campus for a kermesse. There was a family in our community, and their kids go to my kids' school, and their child died and had complications, health issues, and then got RSV, and they passed away. And here was a whole community of people who volunteered their time to cook food, to sell it, to benefit the family. And I was just so moved by that there wasn't like hundreds of people here lined up. Little, a dozen people were coming at a time, but it was like neighbors showing up for their neighbors. I talked to the taquero. He's selling, he was selling tacos, but giving his day because this was a way that he felt he could support his neighbors. And I think that kind of the simple, but really clear ways of caring for people is what's moving me right now. And what I feel really passionate about is like examining my own life of how consistent and how faithful am I in those ways.
That's so fire right there. My friend just showed up last night, and he showed up basically because of that same reason. He's like, there's something wrong in the church in America. And, he's a believer. He's been a believer. He said, I'm 57 years old. I became a Christian like when I was 20. So I've been a believer for a long time. And it's like, in America, it's like, we're so individualistic, right? Our society is so individualistic. And he showed up because he said, I felt like I needed to show up at your house and just talk to a friend, right? And he came with his two daughters and didn't announce it, right? He just showed up and took. Oh, hey, Paul, coming in, right? And we had a great time. We talked and we shared. And that was so beautiful because I think maybe the community that you're talking about, right? That this event happened here, or Kermes. I think that's what it's inspiring about the Latino community in the U.S. specifically, right? That we still have this sense of community. We might be, I think that the challenge is not to lose it, right? Because America is so individualistic that you can lean that way. And I think I've seen a little bit of that in my own life, right? Oh, wow, am I becoming individualistic, right? So I guess, but I love the fact that just as Latinos, we've lived it so much that it comes out naturally, right? And I think it's just something we need to practice and learn. And props to you because you're basically doing that, right? You're saying, hey, if I never show up to my community, then nothing happens. And I love also the fact that it's almost like the mundane, the day-to-day, the rhythms of it may not look grandiose or amazing or like, oh, wow, this event was epic because 5,000 people showed up or something like that, right? We're so used to that, especially here in America, I guess, but we're so used to that. And so I'll give you an example, and then I want to hear more from you, but I'll give you an example because I've done gardening for a long time here in the U.S., and that's a job that a lot of Latinos do, right? There's no hiding that fact. But what I love that I think what I've discovered is that nobody complains about the garden when the gardeners are showing up. It's when they don't show up that you start noticing, oh, there's a few more leaves collecting here. Oh, maybe the plants are growing like funky. And that's when you start noticing, oh. And so I've been telling my kids, because I take them work with me, like we do this weekly, and it's almost like the job is for nobody to notice it. Because when they notice, that means that we haven't been doing the job, right? So in a sense, that's the invitational side of it, right? That for the people on the other side of that beauty to reflect on, oh, who created this space and this beauty and this atmosphere that's inviting, right? And maybe that's where gratitude comes up, right? And we're basically like 3 days away from Thanksgiving, right? So this idea that even as a society, there's things that we can look at that we take for granted, but if we go deeper, there's a person behind beauty, there's a person behind order, there's a person behind a green grass even. Something simple like that, right?
Yeah.
You want to say something?
Well, I do want to mention, you talked about the communal aspect of the Latino community, and I feel so grateful to the Latino community because I feel like that's where I've learned how to care well for my neighbors, and that's shaped my faith to understanding this interdependence, that it isn't an individualistic faith, that isn't the individualism is an idol of our country.
Wow. And
not something that comes out of walking with Christ, who says, that we're to depend on him, that we're not to worry, that we're to trust. And that we're to love our neighbor. There's all this interdependence of our faith. And so I think to your point about, the gardening metaphor, it is, I think for myself, a challenge of what kind of routines have I set up in my life? And even as a pastor, I'm seeing some of the struggle as people have an intention to care for others or want to serve in the community, but it's not a part of their regular rhythm. And to your point, it's like, this has to be a part of our regular rhythm. We have to organize our life in a way that there's space to care for others. And then even when it's needed even more, we've already made that a part of our rhythm. And so we can, like when someone passes away or someone goes in the hospital, like, oh, there's space in my rhythm of my life to care for others. And so it's not as like this big inconvenience or anything. It's just part of how I've set up my life. And that's just an ongoing struggle. I mean, I've been talking about the importance of loving our neighbor for like 20 years, trying to practice that in my life. And I still feel like every week it's like, is this in my rhythm? Is this part of how I live? And I think that setting that up in our rhythms, whether we're serving once a week in with an organization, or we just make that margin to say, okay, who needs someone to bring them a meal? I mean, I cook 3 to 4 times a week. I can just cook another meal for someone else, while I'm cooking and take it over. But it's like, there's an intentionality that I feel like that's the discipline that I'm constantly having to like make space for and remind myself of.
Wow, that's so good. And yeah, if Millie was here, I mean, she's a great example of that, because she cooks, and I mean, super often I see her going out the door with a plate for a neighbor, and I never know which neighbor, because she always finds a new neighbor or somebody to give it to. And I mean, that's a moment that I might take for granted because I'm not the one going, right? But now when I look back, I value that, because that's somebody that's putting almost like the maintenance work of caring for the neighbor, right? And that replicates into better neighborhoods altogether. And I love the fact that you said you've been doing this for 20 years, and I resonate with that, because we've like, I've known about Micah and things that you've done in the past here in Costa Mesa. And this is why I wanted to talk about so for example, I was hearing this pastor who ran for governor and obviously failed, right? But anyways, he was saying that California is one of the hubs for innovation, for creativity. I mean, when you think of like Hollywood and entertainment, when you think of development of new technology and things like that, right? Like Tesla, Apple, like all these things, right? It's always from California. Not always, but I mean, a lot of it comes from California, and that's pretty epic. But at the same time, he was saying, as goes California, so goes the rest of the country, and then as goes the country, so goes the world, right? And so I've heard pastors, and I know you've heard too, because we were in the same event not too long ago where we were praying with all the pastors of Costa Mesa, and they were basically saying the same thing, but the epicenter was Costa Mesa. And they basically said, as goes Costa Mesa, so goes Orange County, and as goes Orange County, so goes California, and as goes California, so goes the U.S. And I mean, that sounds a little pretentious, right? I don't know if that's the word, but at the same time, I do feel like there is the spiritual component to a city that doesn't make the news that often, right? Like Costa Mesa, like, where is that at? And I could tell a story. No, maybe I'm not, but has to do with immigration and crossing the border and saying, I'm from Costa Mesa. And even the immigration officer was like, what? Where is that at? Yeah. And he had to Google it up or whatever it was back then.
I got a speeding ticket one time and they wrote Costa Rica, California on the ticket.
Because where is Costa Mesa? Yeah. But then when you think of the city, there's epic businesses here that, I mean, the number one revenue mall of America is here in Costa Mesa. So things like that.
People come from all over the world to shop there.
Right? So, I mean, the city has influence. And I would love to talk about like the spiritual influence that you have witnessed coming out of Costa Mesa. Is that, I mean, would you say that Costa Mesa influences the world or has a part in influencing the world spiritually? Is that something you have maybe even witness. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I would say that.
Wow.
And I hear what you're saying about being pretentious about it. And yet I think there is power in understanding like spiritual legacy in understanding legacy in general. Whose shoulders are you standing on? What's happened before you were here? We're all stepping into something, particularly spiritually, and God's been on the move in any given place. So, what stream are we becoming a part of? And I think I've found a lot of inspiration and excitement about that. And I think a responsibility that I feel to continue a spiritual legacy of being a witness for Christ in this place. And I think the one that comes to mind and that we were talking about at that pastors gathering is the Jesus People movement, which really started, with Calvary Chapel here in Costa Mesa. That was really an open arm to people who were on the margins that had been ostracized by traditional churches. And people started seeing people come to Christ, because Pastor Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee and all the others that were part of that movement said, we're not going to require that you cut your hair or look a certain way to be able to worship God. And, that's had a huge impact in Costa Mesa, but also was a movement that went around the world. And you talk about like the Vineyard movement that was also like then became a part, grew out of that and is huge around the world. And these are movements of the Spirit of God, of the Word, of rooted in worship. And I think that does shape who we are as a people. I think there's other legacies of Costa Mesa that it's interesting to see how those play together. Like you mentioned, I mean, South Coast Plaza is like the wealthiest place in the world in a lot of ways. I mean, we always used to laugh when I was a kid because we go to New York City and they would brag about all the different stores that they had there. And we're like, well, we have all those stores in one building. You don't even have to walk outside.
Yeah.
Same in Paris. I mean, I was in Italy, in Rome, and it was like Paris, London, Rome, South Coast Plaza. It doesn't even say Costa Mesa.
Wow.
But I think, so there is what else are we exporting around the world? Consumerism, a thirst for more. And I think the spiritual legacy is a lot of combating that, of what does it mean to be a people of simplicity? What does it mean to be a people of gratitude who are contented with enough when we're surrounded by the individualism and consumerism,
Wow, you're a pastor, so you would know. I always kind of tease when we're on the show, because Millie and I, we say, it's in the Bible somewhere. We just know.
Oh, gosh, don't start asking me references.
Right? But I know there's one where it says something like, I forgot okay, let me see if I remember. There's one where it says, I totally lost it. It's going to come back.
What does it have to do with?
Just what you were saying about exporting consumerism. Oh, yeah. Okay, so I remember. Yeah. So it's centered around the idea that when there's more sin, grace abounds all the more, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, the only question is, who said that?
I'm pretty sure that's in Paul. Paul said that. I don't know where, but...
All right. Okay, so Mr. Paul, the apostle, said that. And maybe... if we just put that in the context of Costa Mesa, right? And you're saying, man, I mean, this is the place for consumerism. I mean, the number one revenue mall is here. That speaks volumes about our culture, right? Our wants, our desires. And if there's sinful nature to that, and it's great, and if you pair it with this phrase, right, where there's great sin, there's grace is all the more, maybe it starts making sense to contextualize Costa Mesa as a hub for a spiritual renaissance or even a spiritual legacy of some sorts, right? Yeah,
and as you're saying that, what comes to mind for me is stewardship, because the Costa Mesa is floated from that mall. I mean, because the taxpayers or the tax revenue from South Coast Plaza supports a lot of our budget. And so I think as a city, we have an opportunity then to steward that money and to steward those resources, even steward that influence for the purposes, I would say, for the purposes of the kingdom. And I think as somebody, as a taxpayer in Costa Mesa, I'm like, how do we advocate for stewarding what Costa Mesa does have for those who don't have access to that kind of wealth, who don't have access to that kind of consumerism. And so I think there is an opportunity that affords us. I mean, we're talking specifically about South Coast Plaza right now. I think the tax revenue from that does afford us an opportunity to say, how are we going to steward what we have been given and be grateful for it and say, okay, so we're going to use that to look out for the most marginalized in our community. We're going to use that. I think, like, as a pastor, I'm advocating for policies and practices and budgets that reflect care for the most vulnerable in our community, because I think that is a practice of our faith, that we have to be those who are seeing Christ in those who are hungry, those who don't have homes, those who are in prison. So I think there is a opportunity to steward well then what we have been given because of the benefit of that.
Wow, that's so cool. And no, I can attest to that, because even I remember during the pandemic, I think it was, when there was this government aid that was geared towards people that needed it more, right? And here in Costa Mesa particularly, there were a pretty good section of the population that wouldn't be able to get any of that money, right? Because of their citizen or legal status here. And I mean, even us, we were a few of the benefactors of Redemption Church, which is the church you're at, and another couple of churches that got together and said, okay, the government is aiding people here, but there's a whole entire section of the population who's not going to receive anything. Is there anything we can do? And you raised like an incredible amount of money to be able to give almost like equally as the government was giving, right? And this is a church effort. This is people coming together and caring for the community where the need was not met.
Yeah, I think so. It started with some seed money from Redemption, and we called some other churches. Canopy stepped up right away. The Crossing stepped up right away. Those were kind of the three churches that started, and then other churches jumped in as well. But our thought was, how do we steward what we have for those that are the most marginalized? I mean, this idea that people say, like, I worked for that money, so I deserve it, is ridiculous to me. I woke up one morning and there was a check in my mailbox. I did nothing for that money, simply because I was born in the U.S. And so when I found out that only taxpayers who paid their taxes with a Social Security number would be getting those checks, that was, to me, like a clear, purposeful way to cut out people who are paying taxes with a TIN number, which is how many immigrants pay their taxes. And so we just thought, how do we best steward this money to help people? And we were like, well, who was cut out of the system? Like, to me, that was an unjust move. And I think the people of God are called to be people of justice. And so for us, it was a way to try to make something right that we felt like our government got wrong. And so, people were super generous. We called on our churches to give their check to the cause if they didn't need it, or just if they wanted to give sacrificially. We asked people to tithe off of their check if that was something they could do. We had foundations step up and give. We raised close to $700,000, and we were able to give those checks to close to 700 families in our community.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And I think that speaks volumes of that, right? If we're talking about legacy and how Costa Mesa kind of like steps up, specifically the church in Costa Mesa, even the fact that churches came together for one purpose, right? And if that's not inspiring, right? If people that listen to this in other parts of the world, I think that's the influence. I think that's the spiritual component that Costa Mesa can. I mean, maybe even this story, right? People are finding our podcast from all over the world. It's incredible. Like, people are going to the website from like every single country in the world. And it's exciting, but at the same time, it's like, wow, I mean, here we are in this little town called Costa Mesa talking about these things, and how can this inspire people in their own towns, in their own countries, with their own struggles, in their own problems, and say, maybe not exactly the same, but maybe that inspires somebody to say, oh, I can come together with other churches and do something for, and they'll see the need, right? Everybody, I mean, the Spirit is working. I think he points to where he's moving, and then he invites people to join. So that is epic. So what would be, let me see, if I think of, well, one other thing I want to say about the legacy of Costa Mesa that I think this is just kind of like, for me, that I'm a media guy, and I'm always thinking like podcasts and visuals and things like that, right? And so there's a show called The Chosen, which is basically the life of Christ in episodic. It's a TV show, but in episodes instead of like one film. And it's pretty good, right? I mean, they're on season 3. It's epic. And the main actor, his name is Jonathan Rumi. And he was actually saying in an interview that I saw on YouTube or somewhere, he was saying, oh yeah, I was invited to do this other role for another movie, which is based on the Jesus Revolution movement. Mm. And then he says, yeah, it's about this pastor, Chuck Smith, and it really started in this city called Costa Mesa, right? And so he's naming this city.
I love it.
Wow. I mean, here we go again. And probably everybody's just like, oh, that's so cool, Jonathan Rumi, another movie, right? And they're like, what? I mean, they just don't pay attention to the city, right? But it started right here, and now there's a guy that's going to do a movie. And if The Chosen, I mean, they're getting a lot of success with their show, right? So the movie, when they do the movie about the Jesus Revolution, I think that's going to start almost like reviving the name Costa Mesa for a lot of people. And they're like, where did that happen, right? Kind of like the Azusa revival that happened years ago. And everybody's like, where is Azusa, right? So something like that, I think it's stirring up. And I'm saying it more like from the media side of things,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of cool to see that almost like that spiritual awakening, it's happening, but also at the same time, like I think God, like he's building on this legacy, but he doesn't do things the same way.
Man, that's exactly
right?
what I was thinking on my way over here, because you had said to me you want to talk about spiritual legacy, and I was thinking about that, and almost exactly the same phrase that you just said came into my head. Like, yes, God is moving, and there's always a new thing, and I think we have to be able to celebrate what God has done here and be aware of it and know, again, like I said, whose shoulders are we standing on? Who are the faithful saints that have been here? The Jean Forbaths, the Kathy Gilberts, the Ian Stevensons, and, who are and I would even say, a lot of people.
The Christine Nolfs? Yes.
Well, who's, that's important, to be aware of, and yet still have this sense of, what is God doing now? Do we have our antenna, like our spiritual antenna, aware of how the Spirit is moving and guiding, so that we can step in and be a part of it? And even that fund that you talked about, I felt like was a part of that. Was like a moment in time that something had to happen. It was just very clear. But I think what you're saying about other people hearing in their own community, it's not. I've tried to replicate things I've seen people do in other cities, because I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And like, it seemed like something we needed here. And it's just not the same. Like there has to be this discerning of what is the Spirit of God doing here in this time, in this place. And I think some of the same questions are helpful. Like, where are the injustices? Like, how does God want to make things right in our community? Where is there pain? What are the people who are experiencing pain? Like, what are their dreams and hopes that they want to see happen? And how do I come alongside and step in with that? But we've seen, I think, been really aware of kind of different movements. Someone pointed out to me years ago, I was a part of this group, Kingdom Causes, and they talked about kind of these 3 streams of the faith that I think have been very grounding here in Costa Mesa, which is kind of like you have your intercessors, right? You have like a whole movement of people in prayer. And they have like their own conferences, their own authors they follow, and they, want to see change come from, they're always praying for revival. They want to see change come through prayer. Then you have like a community development people who are always like, what's God doing amongst the poor? Like where is the pain in the city that we can step in with others? And that's kind of been my stream that I'm most connected to. And then you have your like leadership people who are like, how's God moving in the city leaders? We have to pay attention to what's going on with the leaders. Who are the leaders in the city, and how do you convene them? And we have people like Mike Decker who've been really dialed in that space. And I think one of the strengths of Costa Mesa is that we have decided that we are all valuable, and we've really learned to appreciate how those different streams work together to see a whole movement of God, and that we need one another, and that we have to cooperate with one another. And so I wanted to point that out, because I think people tend to like be gifted in one more, or be more interested in one area or another. And I think learning to appreciate that and being able to see like, what can I offer to a city, and how do I like run with that, and also partner with those who maybe, like for me, I had to find like prayer warriors, because that wasn't so much my bent, but I value it, so I participate. But yeah, I think those have led to like a fullness of what we've seen God do here.
Super. I love that. Okay, so this is how we're going to end the episode. We're going to summarize the episode from blasphemous to divine. Okay, so we're going to start with blasphemous emoji. So from your vantage point, what is the most blasphemous idea as it pertains to kind of like, we could probably stay on spiritual legacy / woman in leadership, or whatever you want. Just what's a blasphemous idea according to you?
That individualism is an idol.
Love it. Okay, individualism is an idol. What are you skeptical of?
I'm skeptical of people who don't allow women to lead.
All right. Inspired. What are you inspired by, or where do you see inspiration?
I'm inspired by this movie coming out that you're talking about the Jesus Revolution. This is the first time hearing of it.
Oh, really? Wow. Nice. Okay, it's coming out in April 2023. So pretty soon. I mean, pretty soon to us older people. For a young man, is like, what? April? A holy idea, according to Christine Nolf.
That faithfulness matters.
Oh. And finally, the most divine idea you can think of.
Follow Jesus and love your neighbor.
Ooh, easy and sweet. Okay, Christine, this is what I want to do. Just a little thank you for being here. Is that, and I wish Millie was here, because she made a whole spectacle of it, but we have a couple Christian podcast mugs for you and your husband to enjoy.
So excited.
So here you go. Thank you so much for being on the show and putting up with our emojis and all of that. That was super sweet.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. So let's end the episode with whatever. I want to say this, ChristianPodcast.com, it's growing. You kind of promised to have a writing articles there sometime.
I have one ready. I just need to post it.
Okay. So yeah, whenever you can.
It's a little teaser. It's on Mission.
Mission. Okay.
It might be a little blasphemous.
Love it. That's why we have those emojis right there. For sure we want to feature that, and I think it's only growing a little more. So I invite you who are tuning in, watching, whatever you're tuning in and watching, to like and subscribe to these episodes. Give us a positive review on Spotify, Roku, YouTube, like all those good stuff, Apple Podcasts. And visit ChristianPodcast.com to check out our Belief-O-meter. You can check out and click blasphemous if you feel like the whole website is blasphemous, or divine, however you feel that day. Right now, I think we're up to like 47% divine, which is pretty incredible, right? So, and where do you want to point people to if they want to get to know you more, maybe to Redemption Church? Where can they find that? Yeah,
you can find out more about our ministry at redemptionchurch.org. And I am on Instagram at I'm Christine Nolf.
All right, I'm Christian Nolf on Instagram. Thank you, my friends. We'll see you guys on the next one. Yeah. Oh.